Hi, I'm Eric Rosenfeld. Today we're going to be installing baseboard throughout this home. If you are new to do-it-yourself projects, this is a great way for you to get started. Installing baseboards is one of the easier molding projects to tackle. Stay tuned as we learn how to cut common types of corners you may encounter. An inside 90-degree corner, an outside 90-degree corner, an outside 90-degree corner with a bullnose, and a radius inside and outside 135-degree angle. Let's start off with the most common of corners, the inside 90 degree. There are two ways we can cut it, either miter both pieces or run one piece all the way to the wall and cope the second piece. We'll take a look at coping in just a minute, but if you're a novice and just want to get it done and have it look good, I'd recommend mitering both pieces. Before we go outside and make our first cuts, let's briefly discuss the three things you'll need to know in order to make the correct cut. The first is what side of the piece you'll be cutting from, left or right. The next is whether the front or the back of the baseboard should be longer when the cut is finished. On an inside corner, the back is longer, and with an outside corner, the front side of the molding should be longer. The last thing you need is the cut angle. Here's a cheat sheet. If you're cutting a small baseboard, you can use a standard miter saw and stand your piece up against the fence, using the left and right miter angles to cut the piece. We're installing a 6-inch polyurethane baseboard. If we tried cutting through with the molding standing up, our 12-inch blade wouldn't make it through all the way. To cut a piece this tall, we need to lay the molding flat and use the bevel feature on this compound miter saw. For an inside 90-degree corner, we want to remove 45 degrees from both pieces of molding that are used to create the corner. For the left piece, we will put the top of the molding up against the fence and just cut it at the 45-degree bevel, leaving the miter set at 0. For the right piece, the saw settings stay the same, except we flip the piece around with the bottom touching the fence and make our cut. Our two pieces come together and the corner is ready to be installed. If you're using a painted baseboard, this method is just fine and you can hide any gap with a little bit of caulk. If you are staining the baseboard, it is best to coat the corner like a professional. To do so, you would start by taking a full piece all the way to the wall without any cuts. The second piece would then need to be cut with a 45-degree angle, just as we'd done before. The final part is to take your coping saw and remove all of the exposed part of the profile. So basically, when we look straight down on this piece, we don't want to be able to see any of the exposed polyurethane. Using the coping saw, we carefully cut along the profile, and once all of the exposed portion is gone, we're done. Now we just slide the coped piece over the uncut piece, and you're ready to nail it in place. The outside 90-degree corner is the second most common corner in a room. The process is very similar to an inside 90-degree corner. The only difference is that we want the front of the molding to be longer than the back. Now, let's go outside and make our cuts. For the left piece of the corner, we're going to make our cut on the right side. The bevel angle of our saw should be at 45 degrees with the miter angle at 0. We position the molding with the bottom touching the fence and make our cut. For the right piece of the corner, we're going to make our cut on the left side. The bevel angle of our saw should be at 45 degrees with the miter angle at 0. We position the molding with the top touching the fence and we make our cut. Two simple cuts, and now the two pieces come together nicely and are ready to be installed. We've started with two common corners which are both pretty straightforward. Now let's take a look at one that is a bit more tricky, an outside 90-degree corner with bullnose. To turn this corner with a professional look, we need a transition piece. The length along the back of the transition piece should be 83% of the radius. So on a 1-inch radius like this, it would be about 13/16 of an inch. We also have to extend the pieces from the left and right side beyond where the curve starts so they can meet up to our transition piece. The amount we extend it beyond the curve should be half the length of the transition piece, which is 13/32 of an inch, or approximately 3/8 of an inch for us. That's enough fun with math now, so let's go cut these pieces. Looking back at our cheat sheet, we see that our saw should be set to a 22.5-degree angle for our 2 main pieces and the transition piece. For the left piece of the corner, we're going to make our cut on the right side. The bevel angle of our saw should be at 22.5 degrees with the miter angle at 0. We position the molding with the bottom touching the fence and make our cut. For the right piece of the corner, we make our cut on the left side. The bevel angle of our saw is still at 22.5 degrees with the miter at 0. We position the molding with the top touching the fence and we make our cut. Now for our transition piece. Just take some scrap molding and cut off the left side by putting the top of the molding up against the saw with the bevel angle still at 22.5 degrees. Our bullnose radius is 1 inch, so our transition piece needs to be 13/16 of an inch. Remember that it's being measured on the back of the molding. Position the piece with the bottom of the molding up against the saw. Don't forget the thickness of the saw blade. Make sure that when your cut is made, you are just cutting to your mark. As you can see, our 3 pieces came together nicely. 135-degree corners where the wall takes a 45-degree turn are also fairly common. This particular area has a radius, but if it were a sharp 135-degree inside corner, we would proceed in the same manner as a mitered inside 90-degree corner. The only exception would be the bevel angle, changed from 45 degrees down to 22.5 degrees. We could use the same method with this radius corner, but we would end up with a fairly large gap to caulk. Instead, we are going to use a 1-inch transition piece along the curve. Now let's get this cut. Checking in with our cheat sheet, we can see that all of our cuts are going to be using an 11.25 degree bevel angle. The left piece will be positioned with the top against the fence, bevel set to 11.25 degrees and miter at 0. The right piece will be positioned with the bottom against the fence. Same angle settings on the saw. Now for our transition piece. We grab some scrap molding and with the same saw settings, cut the left side by holding the bottom of the molding up against the fence of the saw. Flipping the piece, we make our mark at 1 inch. Measuring along the back of the molding and with the top against the fence of the saw, we make our right side cut. Our 3 pieces come together nicely and are ready to install. A transition piece can also be used on an outside 135-degree corner with a radius, but it isn't necessary. If you have crown molding in the room and it has a transition piece, then go ahead and add one on your baseboard. You can do so by following the instructions for a bullnose outside 90-degree corner. Just make sure to change the bevel angle for all the cuts to 11.25 degrees. In this room, the crown molding doesn't have a transition piece, so we're going to complete this corner as if it didn't have a radius. Checking our cheat sheet, we see that our cut angle for this 135-degree outside corner is 22.5 degrees. For the left piece of the corner, we're going to make our cut on the right side. The bevel angle of our saw should be at 22.5 degrees with the miter left at 0. We position the molding with the bottom touching the fence and make our cut. For the right piece of the corner, we're going to make our cut on the left side. The bevel angle of our saw is still at 22.5 degrees with the miter at 0. We position the molding with the top touching the fence and make our cut. All right, our two pieces are cut. We'll put them in place. That's a nice clean fit, and they're ready to be installed. That sums up all the main corners you'll likely encounter. Now, before you run off to finish your project, let's go over a few finishing tips. Your walls will expand and contract during the different seasons, so be sure to use an adhesive in between any joints in the molding. Otherwise, the molding can separate. For the same reason, when doing the last piece of a long run, leave the molding a 1/16 of an inch long so that it applies pressure against the other pieces. Also, making the right cuts is important, but don't worry if you're off a bit or if your walls aren't perfectly straight. Once the baseboard's installed, we'll go back and use a latex caulk to cover all of the nail holes and to hide all of the seams between the walls and the molding or at the corners. Now, most of all, have fun. And once it's finished, enjoy the feeling of having completed the project yourself. If you need additional tips on some of the specifics like how to caulk or what equipment to use, go to uDecor.com for more information.